Imagine waking up in the middle of the night. The fire is almost dead. Outside, freezing wind is sweeping across the Great Plains. There is no house, no furnace, no electric heater, and no warm bed waiting for you. Just a small shelter, a few animal hides, a dying fire, and the darkness outside. For the Comanche, winter was not simply a cold season. It could become a fight for survival. One mistake, one unprotected night, could mean serious danger. Yet generations of Comanche people learned how to survive in this harsh environment. They knew how to build shelter, how to use fire, how to turn the animals they hunted into warmth and protection, and how to prepare before winter arrived. So how did Comanche warriors survive freezing nights? The answer is far more fascinating than you might expect. The night was the real enemy, ***. The Great Plains could become brutally cold after sunset. During the day, sunlight could warm the land. But when the sun disappeared, everything changed. Temperatures could fall rapidly, and the wind could make the cold feel even more dangerous. For people living without modern houses, exposure was not simply uncomfortable. It could become a matter of life and death. The Comanche lived across a vast region of the southern plains. Their lives depended heavily on movement, hunting, horses, and the resources of the land. They could not carry a permanent stone house wherever they traveled. Their shelter had to be practical. It had to protect them from the wind, from snow, and from the bitter cold. But it also had to be portable, because when the people moved, their shelter had to move with them. And this is where one of the most important pieces of plains survival technology appeared. The teepee. It looked simple, but inside, it was designed around one of the most valuable things a human could have on a freezing night: fire, shelter that kept them alive. From the outside, a teepee might look surprisingly simple. A few long wooden poles, covered with animal hide. But simplicity did not mean weakness. The design had an important purpose. It created a sheltered space, protected from much of the wind and weather outside. And for people living on the open plains, that protection could make an enormous difference. The teepee was also portable. When a camp needed to move, the shelter could be taken down, carried, and rebuilt somewhere else. That mattered because the Comanche way of life depended heavily on mobility. They followed the movement of animals, searched for resources, and traveled across enormous distances. A permanent house would have made that life much more difficult. Inside the teepee, the arrangement was just as important. A fire could burn near the center, providing warmth during the coldest hours of the night. Smoke could rise toward the opening at the top, while the shelter helped reduce the force of the wind. People could gather around the fire, cook food, dry materials, and escape the freezing air outside. But shelter alone was not enough, because even inside a protected space, the cold could still find its way in. And that is where another resource became extremely important: the bison. For the Comanche, the bison was far more than a source of food. It was one of the most important resources on the Great Plains. Its meat provided nourishment. Its bones could become tools. Its sinew could be used for many practical purposes. And its hide could become something especially valuable during winter. Warmth. Bison hides could be turned into heavy robes, providing an important layer of protection against the cold. And winter hides were especially useful, because bison developed thicker coats during the colder months. Imagine facing a freezing night with nothing but the clothes and materials you could carry. A heavy animal hide could make a tremendous difference. But staying warm was not only about covering your body. The ground itself could steal heat from you. So people also needed insulation beneath them. Hides, robes, and other materials could create a barrier between the body and the frozen earth. The principle was simple: trap warm air, block the wind, and reduce the amount of heat escaping from the body. What looks like a simple animal hide to us could become clothing, bedding, a robe, or part of a shelter. The bison provided food. It provided materials. And in the freezing nights of the plains, it could also provide warmth. But even the best shelter and warmest robe could not replace another essential element of survival: fire. Fire was at the center of winter survival. But keeping a fire alive required knowledge. Fuel had to be collected. The flames had to be controlled. And inside a shelter, people had to balance warmth with smoke and sparks. For the Comanche, fire was more than a source of heat. It could cook food, warm people, dry materials, and make the darkness less threatening. But winter survival did not begin when the temperature dropped. It began months earlier. Food had to be prepared. Hides had to be processed. Clothing had to be ready. And supplies had to be gathered before the harshest weather arrived. Then there was the horse. The horse transformed life on the Great Plains. It allowed people to travel farther, carry more supplies, and follow the movement of animals across enormous distances. The horse did not make winter disappear, but it changed what was possible. When conditions became difficult, mobility itself became a survival tool, because sometimes surviving the cold meant knowing when to stay and when to move. When we imagine a Comanche warrior surviving a freezing night, we often picture one man, sitting alone beside a fire. But that picture misses something important. He was not surviving alone. Survival was communal. Families depended on one another. Someone prepared the food. Someone maintained the shelter. Someone cared for the children. Someone gathered and managed fuel for the fire. And generations of knowledge were passed from one person to the next. A warrior's strength was important. But strength alone could not defeat winter. Knowledge could. Experience could. Preparation could. The Comanche understood their environment because they had learned from people who came before them. They knew how to use the land. They knew how to use the animals. They knew how to move when conditions changed. And they knew how to prepare before the cold arrived. That knowledge was their greatest survival tool. The cold was powerful. The wind was powerful. But generations of human knowledge could be powerful too. And when night fell across the frozen plains, that knowledge could mean the difference between suffering and surviving. Today, when winter becomes uncomfortable, we turn up the heat. We close the windows. We climb into a warm bed. And we rarely think about how dependent we are on modern technology. But imagine removing all of it. No electricity, no furnace, no insulated house, no modern clothing. Suddenly, a small fire becomes precious. A hide becomes valuable. A shelter becomes a piece of survival technology. And preparation becomes the difference between comfort and danger. The Comanche did not defeat winter. They learned how to live with it. And that may be the most remarkable part of their story. Because surviving the freezing nights of the Great Plains was never about being stronger than nature. It was about understanding nature, using what the land provided, and passing that knowledge to the next generation. The cold was powerful. The wind was powerful. The night was powerful. But human knowledge was powerful too. And for generations, that knowledge kept people alive. This is Midnight History, where the past is not just remembered, it is understood.